Hey y'all, Chris again. I wanted to make a brief video about my views and takes on war and conflict. I understand this can be a touchy subject for some people. I understand this can be a very emotional subject for some people. These are 100% my views and opinions. Everyone can disagree. War is something that is very difficult to talk about because war in and of itself is a literal hell thrust upon the planet that men are forced to fight in. Now, this sparked from a conversation I had on Minds about different aspects of war, morality behind war, are there good guys and bad guys in war? Because everybody in war does terrible things. Everybody. It's impossible to not do terrible things in war. And I think that's why a lot of people think that there's no good guy or bad guy in war. War is just bad. And yeah, war is just bad. However, I think that there can be an objective good and an objective bad in war. For instance, the Poles in World War II, they were basically enslaved by the Nazis. They were forced into Polish factories, to build weapons for the Nazi war effort. They were forced to construct weapons of war. They were forced to round up their own people for the concentration camps. And a lot of them surrendered. Whenever faced with conflict or faced with enemy gunfire, a lot of them surrendered or didn't fight fervently. The conscripts. The Poles that were in the factories, they found a loophole where in the German stamping process and validation process for their weapons, because even during war you stamp your weapons normally, and they would create duplicates every so often. Like I think it was 1 out of every 100 or 1 out of every 1,000 or something like that. It wasn't very many, but they made a duplicate, and then they would take that duplicate, hide it, and send it off to the Polish underground for the Polish underground to use to try and fight the Nazis. War was thrust upon the Poles, and they defended themselves the best that they possibly could and in the only ways that they possibly could. I would say in this situation, the Poles are objectively the good force. They're being oppressed by an oppressive invading power, and they are fighting back against that for the salvation and preservation of their own people. And that the Nazis are the objective bad in this situation. They are an invading force, and they did so simply because Germany wanted total war. Now, a lot of people during World War II will point to America and say, well, you guys dropped the bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, so you guys are terrible. Yeah, that was terrible. It arguably saved Japan as a nation. The Japanese people were preparing spears. I don't mean some new weapon, some new future tech. I mean literally spears for a land invasion. They were going to give Japanese people sharpened sticks with metal pointy bits at the end and landmines because they couldn't build more guns. If you got an Arasaka during the land invasion, if there was a land invasion, you're a lucky motherfucker. You are a lucky motherfucker. They weren't going to surrender. They simply weren't. They weren't preparing for a surrender, and the dropping of those 2 bombs forced the issue upon the emperor. The issue was brought forth to him, and it was forced upon him. Should we surrender? And if we surrender, who should we surrender to? Because of the war effort in the Pacific, and because of the war effort towards the north, where Russia was pushing back against the Japanese military, and was close to having a land invasion of their own upon Japan, just like the U.S. was, and the beginning of the failing war effort in China, because of all this front on these other sections of the battlefield, these other battlefronts, the Chinese were able to start pushing back just a little bit. You have to ask yourselves then, okay, should we surrender? Originally the answer was going to be no. We shouldn't surrender. We're going to fight to the last. We're the Japanese. We have honor. We will die with honor. Because of the dropping of those 2 bombs, the issue is brought forth to the emperor. Should we surrender? Who should we surrender to? Should we surrender to the Russians that were slaughtering us Japan, they ain't exactly good people. Should we surrender to the Chinese, who we just spent the past X number of years raping and pillaging? Or should we surrender to the Americans, who are objectively the nice people? We're going to surrender to the Americans. This arguably saved Japan as a nation. Doing that terrible act of dropping those 2 atomic bombs arguably saved Japan. Was dropping those bombs wrong? Yes. That's why nuclear weapons have never been used since. Did it save Japan? I argue yes. So you can't look at that and say America was bad. You can't just look at that and say, oh, America was wrong too. We were aggressed upon. We were attacked. We defended ourselves. Just like the Poles. We just had a better way of defending ourselves. We had a more fervent way of defending ourselves. I would say that America was morally justified in their actions during World War II. I would say the French were morally justified, and the British, and the Poles. I would say that even the Japanese, the Italians, and the Germans in World War II were morally justified in defending themselves whenever we came, and the British came, and the French came, and they started killing them. If you have a force that's trying to kill you, you're going to defend yourself, and that isn't a moral wrong to defend yourself in the best possible way that you can. Morality in war is an insanely tricky topic to cover, because morality in war is just so different from all other morality. Because morality in war does involve killing. You have to kill in war. So you can't take a civilian mindset. You can't take a civilian standard Western mindset of killing is wrong and bring that into war. You can't. It doesn't work. And that's specifically because you have to do it in war. Is it standardly and conventionally morally wrong to kill? Of course. Is it even morally wrong to kill in war? I would argue that in some cases, yeah. Killing of prisoners, for instance, I find to be a moral wrong. Torturing of prisoners, I find to be a moral wrong. And I object to it. Once you go to war, you have to kill, though. And if you're fighting other soldiers, it's not a moral wrong to kill them. It's needed. You're there to win. And winning means the other person has to stop. And you have to make them stop. I'm very happy right now that America is moving towards anti-interventionist attitudes. This was brought up briefly during the Minds conversation. I'm very, very happy that America is starting to look and say, we really don't want to get involved with the interventionist thing. We don't want to interfere anymore. I'm very, very happy about that. Was removing Saddam a good thing? Yes and no. He was slaughtering his own people. That's absolutely wrong. But at the same time, once that happened, a arguably worse system was put in place. I say let them sort it out themselves. If we or our immediate allies are threatened, try and step in and be like, look, you got to put the brakes on, kid. Pump the brakes, kid. You're going too fast. Settle down. You don't settle down, we're gonna stop you. We're gonna put up a line that says you can't go past here. And that's a big thing that's coming about with globalization of things. It becoming easier and easier to get to places overseas, things like this. You almost have to intervene at certain times. It's just really difficult to know when, or why, or who. For instance, us intervening in Iraq, I don't think we should have done that. Us intervening in Korea, I think that was a good thing. South Korea would currently be just Korea. It would all be North Korea under the Kim Jong family and all this. That would be Korea if we didn't intervene there. I view that as a good thing. But how do we know before we go into a conflict that an intervention will be a good thing? We don't. Simply put, we don't. Overall, I would say that yes, war is a reprehensible thing. Absolutely. War is a hell on this planet. It is a hell created by man for men to die in. War should be avoided when at all possible, and it should be a last resort effort. Interventionism is insanely tricky, and I think should be avoided for the absolute most part. There are, however, sometimes good guys and bad guys in a war that you can point to and say, this was a good thing to have had happened. You, for all your failings, for all the bad that you did, it was right for you to do it. I think that you can say that about people and things in war. Not all the time, but sometimes. I know war is a really tricky subject. I know talking about morality in war is a really tricky subject. I know talking about anything about armed physical combat like this is a very tricky subject to have. And it's a very tricky subject to talk about. And these are, again, 100% my views. It's fine for you to disagree, and I completely understand if you might disagree. I do. But I still see war as being a thing that's going to happen. And whenever it happens, you have to be prepared to go to total war. You have to be prepared to crush your enemy, to bring them to their knees, to make them beg for forgiveness and for you to stop. And then at the same time, you have to be willing to stop. You have to be willing to give everything back. You have to be willing to forgive. And you have to be willing to want to avoid it in the first place. I want to thank you guys for watching. I know this is a sort of off-the-cuff video. My next video is going to be on the migrant crisis in Europe and as it pertains to the United States from the perspective of somebody who's from bumfuck nowhere, because that's where I'm from. Someone who already has to deal with refugees that have come over and their impact on their state, their towns, and everything like that, because they have had a very large impact on Maine. A very large impact. So again, thank you guys for watching. Go ahead, please subscribe, share the video all you want, and I'll see you guys next time.